Has anything like that ever happened to you? Where somebody, either a seeker or somebody who attacks your faith in a more vicious way, has had questions that you can't answer. The first time it happened to me in any serious way was 1988. I had a new job in corporate America. I did the nerd thing for Kurt. I was a computer nerd. I was hired to install computers and do work on computers. And I'd been at this office about 2 or 3 days, no more than that. And I was underneath my desk, because that's what I did. I was hooking up my computer. And I heard a voice from behind me in a loud way say, "Hey!" And the first thing I did was hit my head on the underside of the desk, which irritated me. And I backed out of my desk and I turned around and stand up. And there standing before me was a young, handsome, athletic African-American man. And I said, "What?" And he said, first thing this guy says to me, "Are you a Christian?" Just like I said to these guys. And I said, "Yeah, I'm a Christian." And then he says in a very aggressive tone, "So you believe everything in the Bible?" And I said, "I'm a Christian, Bible?" "Yes." And he says, "Have you read the whole Bible?" I said, "No." He says, "So you believe things that you don't even know, and you don't even know why you believe them?" Okay. He was right? He had me. I had not read the whole Bible. And that began about a 5-year conversation with the gentleman whose name was Jerry Anderson, who over the next 5 years, he and I would become very good friends. Jerry was a Muslim, but he grew up in a Christian church. He grew up in a church in downtown inner city Indianapolis, where what he saw was a pastor who drove a Cadillac, had the nicest clothes, the nicest house, while the rest of the congregation was, relatively poor. And there was a lot of things about that church he grew up in that turned him off to Christianity. And as he became an adult, he encountered someone who was a Muslim, who taught him about Islam, and he rejected the Christian faith, whatever that definition would be for him, as he grew up, and he became a Muslim. Well, over the years, he would come in to my office regularly, especially early on, and challenge me. He would come in and say things like, "Jesus never said he was the Son of God." And if you look in Scripture, you'll see Jesus never says, "I am the Son of God." Of course, he says he's one with the Father. He tells the woman at the well when she says we're waiting for the Messiah, "He who speaks to you and he." There's no question he said that. But he would come in with some far more difficult questions, like why in Matthew does it say Judas hung himself, but in the book of Acts, Peter says that he bought a field and flung himself and his intestines spilled out. Isn't that a contradiction? He would come in and say, in Matthew, Jesus says, "Heaven and earth shall pass away before one letter of the law does." And he'd say, "Well, why aren't you observing the Sabbath? How come you eat pork? Why do you eat shellfish?" Or he would come in and say, "Your Bible was put together 400 years after Christ walked the earth at the Council of Carthage. And they didn't include some books because they didn't fit in, and they did it on purpose." And he would hand me a Gospel of Barnabas. You ever heard of that? Gospel of Peter. Now, every time he did this, initially, my faith would take a hit, because he would make a point and I'd go, wow, if that's so, then what I believe is in jeopardy. But every time he would do that, I would take the challenge and I would go and find the answer. Because every question I just raised, there's an answer for it. Okay? But as I went through this process of my faith taking a hit and then going back and finding the answers, I thought about faith. Why is it that our faith tends to fluctuate? Does yours fluctuate up and down? Do events of the world and things in life get to you? Faith is something that we use all the time. Not just the spiritual sense, but when you drove here today, if you went through a green light, you had faith that people in the cross traffic would stop. When we go to the grocery store and buy groceries, we have faith that the food we're going to buy is going to nourish our body and not poison us. Of course, that faith has taken a little bit of hit lately in the dairy department, right? So I got to thinking about this. 2 summers ago, the family and I, we went to West Virginia to go whitewater rafting. Basically, we went to West Virginia, faced death, and came home. Okay? So we went out with my brother-in-law and my nephew. And at the outfitters where you go and they suit you up with the gear, they get you your raft and all of that, they had this huge facility. the normal trappings of a tourist place, you know, pictures and places to eat and all this sort of stuff. But they also had a small lake where they had big toys you could play on, inflatable stuff. And at this lake was a 3 to 4 story tower. And on this tower was a zip line. Okay? And of course, my 2 sons, being teenagers, first thing they want to do is run up there, get on the zip line, and go down, and it would run about 100 yards and drop in the lake. So they go up there, they're doing the zip line. Dad, come on up. I don't know when it happened, but sometime between the time I was a teenager and now, I got afraid of heights. I can't watch a movie where there's a character like on a bridge or something without my knees getting weak, okay? And I'm in the safety of my living room. So they're like, Dad, come up here. I'm like, no, that's okay, boys, have fun. My nephew and his son get up there. Uncle Dave, come on up. You're good, have fun. Then it happened. Jane went up there. Guys, if the girl does it, you gotta do it. So, I finally say, okay, I start climbing the stairs, I'm looking down, getting higher and higher. I get to the top, and there's a lifeguard there who's going to instruct me as to how to use the equipment and go down the zip line. She's 12. And she starts gearing me up. First she says, step into this, and it's this little rope kind of thing, harness, and we step in there, and it's just like going to be right around my legs. And I'm like, I want a full body harness. So this leg thing, this is not sufficient. And she shows me this device that's going to go over the cable. I'm like, I've never seen this before. How does this work? And then to connect the rope thing that can't hold a sack of potatoes to the device I've never seen, she pulls out a carabiner that I'm sure I saw at the dollar store, at the checkout counter. I'm like, there's no way that's holding me. But I get geared up because everybody's watching. And I get to the edge and I say, now what? She says, lift your feet. And I lift my feet, and the first time down, I'm sure I looked very graceful, because I look like a sack. I mean, I'm like in the fetal position, I'm hanging on for dear life. And I get to the bottom, and you land about 30 feet before the shore, and the 12-year-old told me that what you have to do is you have to swim to the shore with this thing still on the wire. So I'm dragging, and I'm a swimmer, but I'm like flopping in the water. It was a great time. But I got out of the water, and kind of, you have to walk all the way back around. I'm looking at this device. I'm like, okay, I see how this works now. And I look at the rope thing, and I say, that's the same kind of thing we use over here in Bloomington at the rock climbing place. That held me. This should hold me. Still wasn't sure about the dollar store carabiner. Worried me. I have to go a second time, guys, right? Girl goes, you have to go, and you have to go more than once. It's the rules of life, okay? I go a second time. I'm like, hey, this could be fun. And then I go a third time and a fourth time, and before long, you know, I'm going down, no hands, you know, everything like this. And I even figured out that at the bottom, if I keep my feet out and I let my butt hit the water first, I'll just kind of skid. Derriere skidding is what we'll call that. Skid all the way to the shore. It was great. So what happened? How did my faith grow in this process of ziplining? Well, I started to learn the facts. I figured out, okay, I can trust this leg harness. I figured out, oh, I understand how this device works. Okay, maybe the dollar store carabiner will hold me. And it became fun. So facts led to faith, which led to feeling. I got to enjoy the trip down rather than going down like a sack of potatoes. Now, is that how our faith works? When we were exploring, like my seeker earlier, whether or not Jesus was something I was going to embrace and give my life to, did we all sit down and say, okay, I've heard about this Jesus guy. I'm going to read the Bible from cover to cover. Let's get the information. And once I've done that, I'm going to seek out people who are knowledgeable about this book itself, because just reading this doesn't help me if I don't know where it came from or who wrote it. And then I'm going to do some internet research on the whole Christianity thing. Look at the history of the religion. Make sure I know what's going on. And then I'm going to come forward and give my life to Christ. Isn't that how it happens for all of us? I don't think so. There's a youth speaker whose name is Tony Nolan. I've heard him speak twice now. And the first time I heard him speak, he told this story. He was 10 years old. He was at a youth camp. And every evening they would have a worship service, and every evening they would have a different speaker. Okay? At this point, like the last night, they had a speaker. Now, usually youth speakers are, lighthearted, humorous, kind of goofy, Josh Gerber types, right? Is he here? No, I'll tell him later. Okay, but this guy was like fire and brimstone. He gets up there and in front of a 210-year-old, he's all about hell and damnation and fire and brimstone and, sinner and all this stuff. So he's got these 10-year-old kids in the audience, just eyes wide open. So about halfway through this message, a thunderstorm rolls in. So now you got the fire and the brimstone and the hell and then lightning and cracks of thunder and these 10-year-olds. And then all of a sudden, the electricity goes out in the building, and it's pitch black. Well, this preacher is not going to stop. He finds a flashlight, and he finishes by preaching like this. Invitation time comes. 210-year-old boys in the crowd. 210-year-old boys come forward and give their life to Jesus. Now, was that a true giving of their lives to Jesus, or were they just scared to death temporarily? How many of those 10-year-old boys continued to walk with Christ as they went forward, right? We come to Christ very often because of feelings. We come to church, we hear some messages. This all makes sense. Paul tells us that the knowledge of God is built in as a part of us, right? But then we tend to start our faith from feeling, and the problem comes in when we don't follow it up with fact, when we don't follow it up with knowledge. I want you to meet, a friend of mine, and probably a friend of yours, and a niece of some of you. I want you to meet Chelsea, and I want you to hear her story.